She had always been quiet, blending into the background wherever she went. People rarely noticed her in a crowd, and she was okay with that. She liked the quiet moments, the kind where she could sit alone and let her thoughts drift. But today was different. Today she was standing in a room filled with people who didn't know her, who had no idea who she was or what she could do. They were waiting to see a performance, a display of talent that would entertain them, and she was about to be the center of it all. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old curtains. Rows of chairs were set up neatly, and the murmurs of the crowd created a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor. She looked around, her eyes scanning the audience, and noticed the variety of expressions. Some faces were curious, some bored, and some carried a slight smirk, like they already thought they knew what was coming. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that it didn't matter what they thought. She had practiced, she knew her music, and she had something inside her that she had been waiting to share for a long time. Her fingers trembled slightly as she approached the piano. It was a grand piano, its black surface gleaming under the stage lights. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar cool touch beneath her fingers. It was comforting. The room grew a little quieter as people noticed her at the piano, some shifting in their seats, perhaps expecting a clumsy performance from someone they didn't recognize. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting her mind settle, letting the quiet she loved so much fill her thoughts. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and she would not let fear take it away from her. A few people whispered to each other, some laughter rising softly. They thought it would be funny to watch her struggle, perhaps expecting an awkward stumble or a weak melody. She could hear them, and it made her stomach twist, but she didn't let it show. She focused on the keys in front of her, remembering the hours she had spent practicing alone, the late nights where no one was there to hear her but the walls of her room. She thought of every note, every small piece she had learned, and suddenly the nerves didn't feel so heavy. They were just another challenge to overcome, another part of the story she was about to tell. The first sound she made was soft, barely louder than a whisper. The note floated into the room, and some people turned their heads, surprised to hear anything at all. She continued, letting the melody grow slowly, carefully, each note finding its place. The laughter she had heard before began to fade, replaced by something else. Curiosity. People leaned forward slightly, some frowning as if trying to understand what they were hearing. She didn't rush. She let each chord settle, each movement of her hands flow naturally, as if the piano itself were guiding her. As she played, memories of her past washed over her. She remembered sitting at an old upright piano in a small living room, her fingers pressing the keys as she tried to recreate songs she had heard on the radio. Her parents had never really noticed her playing, too busy with their own lives, and the teachers at school had never seen her potential. It had always been just her and the music, a private world where she could express everything she couldn't say out loud. And now, for the first time, she was sharing that world with strangers. Her heart beat faster, but it was a good kind of fast, the kind that made her feel alive and present. Some of the audience members were still skeptical. A few shook their heads, thinking perhaps she was just lucky with a few notes, or that the melody wouldn't last. But she didn't care about their doubts. She cared about the music, about the story she was telling through the piano. Her fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that grew with every passing moment. She could feel the rhythm in her bones, the harmony in her heart, and the energy in the room started to shift. The people who had been laughing quietly now looked at her with something closer to interest, their eyes following the movements of her hands, their ears attuned to the sounds she was creating. A smile began to form on her face, small and hesitant at first, but it grew as she noticed the change. She wasn't just playing notes anymore. She was connecting with the people around her. She could see the corners of mouths turning upward, the subtle nods, the widening eyes. The music carried a part of her that words never could, and it reached them in a way that nothing else could. She had always wondered if anyone would ever understand her through her music, and now she was seeing the answer right in front of her. Her mind returned to the room itself. The grand piano, the polished wood, the soft lighting. It all felt different now, alive in a way it hadn't before. She wasn't just performing. She was breathing life into the space, filling it with something that belonged to her and to the people who were finally starting to notice. The laughter that had once echoed at the edges of the room was gone, replaced by silence, a quiet attentiveness that made her feel both nervous and exhilarated. Every note mattered, every pause, every breath. She thought of the future for a brief moment. What if she could play for more people, for bigger rooms, for people who really needed to hear her music? The thought made her heart flutter, but she pushed it aside. Right now, it was just her and the piano, and that was enough. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness something they hadn't expected. She had waited her whole life for this, and nothing could stop her now. With each chord, the story unfolded. She wasn't playing just to fill the space. She was playing to tell her own story, to show everyone who she was without saying a word. The people who had been skeptical now leaned closer, drawn in by the sincerity of the music. The subtle beauty of her performance started to capture their attention, the kind of attention that makes people forget to laugh, forget to talk, just listen. She felt a quiet thrill, a confirmation that all her effort, all her patience, all her quiet hours alone had led to this moment. The first part of her performance was almost like a conversation. She played softly, gently, testing the waters, gauging the room. The audience responded unconsciously, their expressions shifting, their body language changing. She could feel it, a gentle push of energy moving back toward her. That energy gave her courage, made her fingers move more freely, more confidently. She was no longer the quiet girl at the back of the room. She was a storyteller, a guide through a journey of sound. Time seemed to stretch and bend around her. Minutes felt like seconds, and the room itself became a different place, a temporary world shaped entirely by the music. She played with intention, with feeling, and with a subtle strength that made every note count. Even those who had been doubtful could no longer ignore her skill and her presence. Something had shifted, and she could feel it, an unspoken connection forming between her and everyone watching. They were no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to something real, something human and moving. As she finished the first part of her piece, she lifted her hands from the keys for a moment, letting the final note linger in the air. The silence that followed was almost tangible, a collective breath held by the audience as they processed what they had just heard. A few people blinked, as if waking from a daze, and she smiled, a quiet, satisfied smile. She had made it through the first part, had captured their attention, and had begun to prove that her quiet, unassuming presence held more than anyone could imagine. She looked out at the crowd again, noticing small changes in their expressions. The sneers and laughter were gone, replaced by curiosity, respect, and even admiration in some faces. She took another deep breath and prepared to continue, knowing that the best part of her story was still ahead. The first part had been the introduction, the quiet beginning, and now the real journey was about to unfold. She felt ready, more confident than she had ever been, and as she let her fingers hover over the keys once more, she knew that something remarkable was about to happen. The music was hers, and the moment was hers, and the audience was finally starting to understand. The audience's initial curiosity began to solidify into something more focused. Some still whispered to each other, but the laughter had vanished completely. The girl sitting at the piano noticed the change, and it gave her a small spark of courage. She had expected to face ridicule, maybe even embarrassment, but she had not expected this quiet attention. It felt strange, almost heavy, but it was the kind of attention that could carry her music into places she had never imagined. Her hands hovered over the keys as she considered her next move. She wanted to show them everything she could, but she didn't want to rush. She knew that the first notes had already shifted the room, and the next few had to build upon that shift. She remembered the evenings spent alone, fingers brushing over the piano, eyes closed, imagining what it would feel like if someone truly listened. She had been rehearsing for this moment in silence, preparing not just the music but herself for the chance to be understood. That preparation now felt like armor, steadying her against any lingering doubt. The room seemed to breathe with her as she began the next part of her performance. She started with a delicate, simple melody, soft and almost hesitant. It was almost as if she were speaking to each person individually, letting them hear her thoughts through sound instead of words. She noticed some in the front rows leaning forward, their expressions curious, even slightly tense. They were unsure what to expect next, and she liked that. She wanted them to be part of this journey, not just observers. Each note was a step further into her story. A few people in the back had their arms crossed, their faces still skeptical. She sensed it, not with sight but with the faintest feeling, like the air around her vibrating with uncertainty. She didn't let it bother her. Instead, she let it fuel her focus. Her fingers moved over the keys with precision, confidence growing with every chord. The melody began to swell, layering complexity upon simplicity. Each note was intentional, carefully placed. Each pause weighted with meaning. The audience began to notice the care and thought behind every sound. As she continued, she let herself be carried by the music. Memories and emotions she had long buried found their way into her playing. The evenings alone in her small room, the late nights of practice, the tiny victories when she learned a difficult piece. All of it flowed through her fingers. She could almost feel the audience absorbing the emotions, the silent communication between performer and listener. A few heads turned slightly, people exchanging glances, realizing that the quiet girl before them was capable of something extraordinary. Some whispers began to spread across the room, softer this time, not of laughter but of disbelief. It was a sound that told her she had their attention completely. She allowed herself a small, satisfied breath, keeping her focus on the music and not on her own rising confidence. The melody changed again, taking a more expressive tone, showing strength and vulnerability at the same time. She played with care, knowing that each person was hearing her story, and she wanted every note to matter. As the notes continued to fill the space, she became aware of a subtle rhythm in the room. She felt it in the slight movement of shoulders, the shifting of weight in chairs, the quiet tilts of heads toward the piano. The audience was no longer simply watching. They were listening, truly listening, as if they could feel the music inside themselves. That realization filled her with a quiet thrill. This was why she had practiced in silence all those years. This was why she had persevered when no one was paying attention. This was the moment where her music had meaning outside the walls of her private world. Her mind wandered briefly to those who had doubted her before she even touched the piano. She remembered the smirks, the whispers, the laughter. At first, they had felt like obstacles, walls she had to push through. Now, however, they seemed irrelevant. The music spoke louder than any word or gesture of doubt. She could feel the shift in energy in the room, a tangible movement from skepticism to curiosity, then to admiration. And she was only halfway through what she wanted to express. She allowed herself to explore the piano, moving her hands over it more boldly now, experimenting with dynamics, soft and loud, gentle and forceful. The audience responded unconsciously, leaning in closer, some holding their breath, completely absorbed. She was telling a story without a single word, and they were understanding it perfectly. That was a revelation to her. She had always wondered if music could communicate what words could not, and now she knew it could. A couple of people in the back who had initially been the most skeptical shifted uncomfortably, their arms unfolding, eyes widening. She noticed the change but didn't look at them directly. Instead, she let her hands express what she wanted, letting the music speak for her. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift in tempo was deliberate. She could feel the energy in the room responding to her, lifting her confidence, making her more expressive with each measure. The piano had become an extension of her voice, a way to reach beyond herself, and she was beginning to trust it fully. The complexity of her piece increased gradually. She had started with simplicity, then woven in more intricate patterns, more subtle harmonies, and richer tones. She could see the audience reacting differently now. Some faces softened, some eyes glistened with unspoken emotion, and a few people even held their hands near their chests, as if feeling the music physically. She hadn't expected such a visceral response, but she welcomed it. It made the performance feel alive, More than just a display of skill, it was a shared human experience. She paused for a brief moment, letting the last chord linger. The room held its breath in that silence, and she felt it as a powerful connection between her and the listeners. The pause was not just a break in the music but a moment for the audience to process, to feel, to understand. The change in energy was remarkable. She had crossed the threshold from being ignored and laughed at to commanding full attention. That shift was intoxicating and humbling at the same time. As she began the next section, she focused on emotional expression, letting each note carry feeling rather than just technical perfection. She thought of personal experiences, moments of quiet triumph, times of struggle, and the constant persistence that had brought her here. Each hand movement, each chord, became a conversation with the audience, and she could feel them responding to the story. Some heads nodded slightly, some eyes glimmered with tears, and the room itself seemed to hold a gentle energy that pulled everyone closer into the moment. Despite the growing connection with the audience, a sense of vulnerability lingered. Performing had always been a private act for her, something she did alone. Standing here, knowing people were truly watching and listening, was exposing a piece of her soul. But that exposure no longer felt frightening. It felt necessary. She realized that sharing this part of herself was not just for recognition but for connection, for understanding. And as the music flowed from her fingers, she felt a release, a quiet liberation in sharing what she had kept inside for so long. The audience's reaction continued to evolve. Conversations had stopped completely, replaced by attentive silence. People who had been doubtful were leaning forward, some even closing their eyes, letting the music enter them fully. She noticed subtle movements, small signs that her music was touching them more deeply than she could have imagined. Every note she played became more confident, more expressive, as if the music itself encouraged her to push further. She realized she had gained not just their attention but their respect. The girl's focus never wavered. Her hands flew over the keys, creating a balance of rhythm and melody that was both intricate and accessible. She experimented with tempo, softening and then strengthening her touch, creating a conversation between the piano and the listeners. The audience leaned in, their breathing slowing, their attention complete. There was no laughter, no whispering, only the sound of the piano and the collective absorption of the people in the room. In the quiet moments between melodies, she allowed herself to notice the impact she was making. She had transformed from a quiet, overlooked girl into the central force of a story being told through music. The room had shifted, and she had been the agent of that change. It was a subtle, unspoken triumph, one that filled her with pride and relief. She knew she was only at the beginning of what she could share, but the first steps had been taken, and they were powerful. With the audience now completely attentive, she felt a surge of courage and anticipation. She knew the next part of the performance would be more complex, more daring, and it would take everything she had to continue connecting with them. She was ready, and as she positioned her fingers over the keys, she could sense that the journey she was taking them on was far from over. They were no longer just listeners. They were participants in something real, something moving, and something unforgettable. The laughter was gone, replaced by anticipation, curiosity, and wonder, and she smiled quietly to herself, knowing the moment of true astonishment was just ahead. By the time she moved into the next section of her performance, the room felt completely different from how it had at the beginning. The air was thicker somehow, full of attention and quiet emotion. She could sense it without even looking up. Every person in the room was with her now. No one was laughing. No one was doubting. They were waiting, listening, feeling. That realization settled into her chest and gave her a steady kind of strength. She adjusted her posture slightly and let her fingers rest on the keys for just a second longer than before. That small pause carried weight. The audience felt it too. It was no longer just a pause in music, but a shared breath between her and everyone watching. Then she began again, this time with more confidence, letting the melody rise with a stronger voice. The notes flowed faster now, weaving together in a way that showed both skill and emotion. She wasn't holding back anymore. The piano responded to her touch as if it had been waiting for this moment. Each key pressed down cleanly, each sound clear and full. Her hands moved smoothly, almost effortlessly, guided by years of quiet practice. She remembered how difficult this part had once been, how many times she had stumbled while learning it. But now, under the lights and before the crowd, it felt natural. The fear she had carried earlier was gone, replaced by focus and determination. She began to tell a deeper story through the music. This part was about struggle, about feeling unseen and unheard. The melody dipped low, heavy with emotion, then rose again, hopeful and bright. People in the audience shifted in their seats, clearly affected. Some frowned slightly, others softened, as if recognizing parts of their own lives in the sound. She didn't know their stories, but she felt the connection, strong and real. Her thoughts briefly drifted back to the moments that had shaped her. The times she had been overlooked, the moments when her efforts went unnoticed. She remembered playing alone while others laughed in another room, unaware of the music she was creating. Those memories didn't hurt as much now. Instead, they gave her performance depth. Every emotion she had carried quietly for years found a place in her hands. The rhythm picked up, becoming more complex. Her fingers moved faster, crossing over each other with practiced ease. This was the part that often impressed people when they heard it for the first time. She could feel the audience reacting to it, a subtle shift in energy, a collective sense of surprise. Eyes widened, backs straightened. A few people even smiled without realizing it. The quiet girl they had underestimated was revealing her full ability. She stayed completely present, listening closely to every sound she created. When a note rang longer than expected, she adjusted. When the tempo felt just slightly off, she corrected it. These small choices made the performance feel alive, not perfect, but real. The audience seemed to appreciate that honesty. They weren't watching a machine or a rehearsed act. They were watching a person express something deeply personal. As the music swelled, she leaned into it, letting her shoulders relax and her movements become more fluid. She was no longer stiff or cautious. Her body moved naturally with the sound, guided by instinct rather than fear. The piano became an extension of her, and the room faded away until only the music remained. It was the kind of moment performers dream about, when everything clicks and doubt disappears. In the crowd, reactions continued to change. Some people exchanged quick glances, as if silently asking each other if they were hearing the same thing. Others sat completely still, afraid to break the spell. A few mouths were slightly open, caught between surprise and admiration. She didn't need to look to know this. She felt it in the way the room listened, in the way silence wrapped tightly around each note. She moved into a section that required both strength and control. The notes were powerful but precise, demanding focus and calm. This was where she once struggled the most, where frustration used to make her stop playing altogether. But now her hands stayed steady. She trusted herself. Every successful phrase built on the last, creating momentum that carried her forward. The audience followed willingly, pulled along by the sound. Her breathing slowed, syncing naturally with the rhythm. Each inhale and exhale matched the rise and fall of the music. It grounded her, kept her centered. She realized she wasn't performing for approval anymore. She was performing because this was who she was. The piano wasn't a tool to impress. It was her voice, finally heard. The melody softened again, offering contrast to the intensity that came before. This quieter section felt intimate, like a secret shared between her and the listeners. The room seemed to lean in, hanging onto every gentle note. The contrast made the earlier power even more meaningful. She understood now why this piece had always felt special to her. It mirrored her own journey, quiet beginnings leading to unexpected strength. She allowed a brief smile to cross her face as she played. Not a proud smile, but one of relief and gratitude. All those hours alone, all the moments of doubt, had led to this connection. She could see now that being unnoticed hadn't meant being unworthy. It had simply meant waiting for the right moment. And this was it. As she transitioned toward the end of the section, the music grew fuller again, preparing the audience for what was coming next. She could feel anticipation building, like a held breath across the room. People were no longer just impressed. They were invested. They wanted to see where the music would take them, how the story would end. That awareness sharpened her focus even more. She pressed into the keys with confidence, letting the sound fill every corner of the room. The piano echoed slightly, adding depth and warmth to the melody. The space felt alive, transformed by the performance. It no longer felt like a simple event or a casual gathering. It felt important, meaningful, like something people would remember. Near the end of this part, she introduced a familiar theme from earlier in the piece, but played it differently now. Stronger, clearer, more assured. It was a reflection of her own change during the performance. The audience recognized it too, whether consciously or not. The repetition carried weight, showing growth and transformation. When she finally eased into the closing notes of this section, the room remained silent, completely absorbed. No one moved. No one coughed or shifted. The connection was total. She let the final note ring out, then gently lifted her hands from the keys. The sound faded slowly, leaving behind a deep, meaningful silence. She stayed still for a moment, letting the silence speak. Her heart was beating fast, but it felt steady, strong. She knew she had crossed another line, pushed further into her potential. The journey was building, and the most powerful moments were still ahead. As she prepared to continue, she sensed that the audience was no longer just watching a performance. They were witnessing a transformation, one that had only just begun. She did not rush into the next movement. She let the silence sit for a moment longer, long enough for everyone to feel it. That quiet space was powerful. It told the audience that something important was about to happen. Her hands hovered above the keys, steady now, no shaking, no doubt. She felt grounded, like she finally belonged right where she was. When she began again, the sound was stronger than before. Not loud in a careless way, but confident and full. The melody moved forward with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going. This part of the music carried weight. It spoke of courage, of standing tall after being ignored for too long. The audience reacted instantly. A few people straightened in their seats. Others drew a slow breath, sensing the shift. Her fingers moved with speed and control, pressing the keys with certainty. Every note landed cleanly, each one building on the last. This was the most demanding part of the piece, the section she once feared. In the past, her hands had stumbled here, her mind filled with worry. But now there was no fear. She trusted herself completely. The piano answered her touch with rich sound that filled the room. The energy in the space changed again, growing intense but focused. People were no longer just listening quietly. They were emotionally invested. Some leaned forward without realizing it. Others held their breath during faster runs, almost afraid to interrupt the flow. She felt that energy wrap around her, lifting her higher, pushing her to give everything she had. This section of the music demanded strength, and she gave it willingly. Her hands moved faster, crossing and stretching, yet never losing control. The rhythm surged like a strong heartbeat. It told a story of effort, of persistence, of refusing to give up even when things felt impossible. She poured every memory of struggle into the sound, turning it into something powerful and clear. The audience could feel it. Faces that once showed doubt now showed amazement. Eyes followed her hands closely, tracking movements that seemed almost impossible. A few people shook their heads slightly, not in disbelief anymore, but in awe. They had expected little and were now witnessing something far beyond that. The contrast made the moment even stronger. She stayed focused, her expression calm even as the music grew bold. Inside, she felt a fire she had never felt before. It wasn't nervous energy. It was purpose. She understood now that this performance was bigger than proving herself. It was about showing what happens when someone refuses to stay small just because others expect them to. As the melody climbed higher, the sound became bright and commanding. The piano filled every corner of the room, echoing off the walls and ceiling. It felt as if the space itself was responding, amplifying her voice. The audience remained silent, completely absorbed. No one checked their phone. No one shifted unnecessarily. Every person was present. She moved into a rapid sequence of notes, one of the most challenging parts of the piece. In the past, her heart used to race here, fear creeping into her fingers. Now her breathing stayed steady. Her hands moved with confidence earned through years of quiet effort. Each note landed exactly where it should, clean and strong. The tension in the room rose with every second. A few people gasped softly when she completed the sequence without breaking the flow. Others smiled openly now, no longer hiding their reaction. The laughter from earlier felt like a distant memory. This was respect. This was recognition. And she felt it deeply. The music suddenly softened, creating contrast. After all that power, she pulled back, letting the melody breathe. It was gentle but confident, like someone who knows their strength and doesn't need to prove it anymore. This shift surprised the audience again. They leaned into the quiet, drawn in by the control she showed. She allowed emotion to guide her now more than technique. The notes carried warmth, hope, and calm assurance. It felt like a message, a reminder that strength does not always need volume. Sometimes it lives in restraint, in knowing when to hold back. The room felt peaceful yet charged with meaning. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but she sensed the crowd completely. She could feel their attention like a steady current. Some people's eyes were wide. Others blinked slowly, moved in ways they didn't fully understand. The connection was deep now, undeniable. She was no longer just playing for them. She was sharing something with them. The melody built again, carefully this time, like climbing a hill with purpose. Each phrase added another layer, another feeling. The audience followed closely, trusting her to lead them. That trust meant everything. It told her they believed in her now, not because of who they thought she was, but because of what she was showing them. Her hands moved with graceful strength, her posture relaxed yet confident. She felt tall inside, steady and sure. All the moments of being overlooked, of being underestimated, seemed small now. They had shaped her, prepared her, but they no longer defined her. This moment did. As she approached the peak of this section, the music grew bold again. The sound filled the space with energy and emotion, rising to a powerful statement. The audience could feel the climax approaching. Hearts raced. Bodies leaned forward. The room seemed to hold its breath. She delivered the peak with precision and feeling, striking the keys with confidence and clarity. The sound was full and commanding, leaving no doubt about her ability. A wave of emotion moved through the audience. Some people's eyes shone. Others sat back in their chairs, overwhelmed by the impact. She did not stop immediately. She let the sound carry, then slowly guided it downward, easing the intensity. The transition was smooth, controlled, and deeply satisfying. It showed maturity, not just talent. The audience recognized that too. This was not luck. This was skill built over time. As the final notes of this section faded, a deep silence followed. It was heavier than before, filled with emotion and respect. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence itself felt like applause waiting to happen. She held her position for a moment, hands resting lightly above the keys. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt calm. She knew she had reached a turning point. The hardest part was behind her, and the room was completely hers now. When she finally prepared to move on, a quiet confidence settled over her. She had given everything in this part, and it had been received. The audience was no longer surprised. They were convinced. And as she readied herself for the final stretch, she understood that the moment everyone would remember most was just ahead. She took one more slow breath before beginning the final part. The room felt steady now, calm but alive. Every person was waiting, not with doubt, but with trust. She felt it in the stillness, in the way no one rushed the moment. Her hands rested on the keys, warm from the effort, ready to finish what she had started. The first notes of the final section were gentle, almost tender. They carried a feeling of reflection, as if the music was looking back on the journey it had taken. The sound was clear and honest, without force. She wanted this part to speak softly, to remind everyone where the story began. The audience leaned into it, listening with open attention, letting the sound settle deep. She played with care, allowing space between phrases. Each pause felt meaningful. It gave the music room to breathe and gave the listeners time to feel. The melody flowed like a calm stream after a storm, steady and reassuring. People's faces softened. A few smiled without realizing it. The tension from earlier had transformed into warmth. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the girl she used to be, the one who practiced in quiet rooms without applause. That girl had dreamed of being heard but never expected a moment like this. Standing here now, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not pride, but appreciation for every step that had led her here. The music carried that feeling forward. As the piece continued, she introduced a familiar theme from earlier, but played it slower, richer, and more confident. Felt like a full circle. The audience recognized it and responded instantly. A few heads nodded gently. The sound carried memory and growth at the same time, showing how far the journey had come. Her hands moved smoothly, without hesitation. There was no rush to finish. She allowed the music to unfold naturally, trusting it to reach its own ending. The piano responded beautifully, each note clear and full. The room seemed to glow with attention, as if everyone shared the same quiet understanding. She felt connected not just to the piano, but to the people listening. It was a rare connection, fragile and powerful. She knew moments like this did not happen often. That knowledge made her careful, respectful of the space she held. She played with honesty, letting emotion guide her touch. The melody grew slightly stronger, not dramatic, but confident. Carried a sense of hope, of moving forward. The audience felt it too. Some sat taller. Others breathed a little deeper. It was the sound of someone stepping into who they were meant to be. She remembered all the times she had questioned herself, wondering if her effort mattered. Those doubts felt distant now. Not erased but understood. They had shaped her, strengthened her, and led her here. The music honored that truth, without bitterness or regret. As she moved closer to the end, the piece became simpler again. Fewer notes, clear lines, strong feeling. She wanted the ending to feel honest, not crowded. The audience followed every sound, fully present. No one wanted the moment to break. She slowed her tempo, letting each note linger just a little longer. The room stayed silent except for the piano. Even the smallest sound felt important. It was as if time itself had slowed, giving everyone a chance to truly feel what was happening. Her breathing stayed calm, steady. She felt grounded, certain. This was not about impressing anyone anymore. It was about finishing the story with truth. The piano sang gently under her hands, warm and clear. The final melody rose slightly, carrying a quiet sense of release. Felt like a deep exhale after a long journey. Some people's eyes glistened. Others pressed their lips together, moved by feelings they did not expect. The connection held strong. She approached the last notes with care, letting the sound soften naturally. Each key pressed felt deliberate and final. The ending was near, and she wanted it to land gently, without force. The room remained completely still, as if everyone understood the importance of the moment. When she played the final note, she let it ring. She did not move right away. The sound floated through the room, then slowly faded into silence. She kept her hands resting lightly on the keys, honoring the end. For a brief moment, there was nothing, just silence. Deep, full, meaningful silence. Then someone in the audience stood. Another followed, and then another. The room filled with applause, not sudden and loud at first, but strong and sincere. It grew quickly, surrounding her. She lifted her hands from the piano and stood slowly, turning to face the audience. Her heart raced, but she felt calm. The applause continued, louder now. Some people clapped above their heads. Others smiled openly. A few wiped their eyes. The laughter from the beginning felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She gave a small, respectful bow, not dramatic, just grateful. The applause did not stop right away. It carried on, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. She felt it wash over her not as validation, but as shared recognition. As the sound slowly settled, she looked across the room. Faces that once held doubt now held respect. Curiosity had turned into admiration. She understood then that she had changed something not just for herself, but for those who had watched. She stepped away from the piano carefully, almost reluctantly. The instrument that had been her voice now rested quietly behind her. She felt a sense of completion, deep and satisfying. The story had been told. People began talking softly, still processing what they had experienced. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled at her as she passed. She returned those smiles gently, still feeling the weight and beauty of the moment. She did not feel like a different person now. She felt like a fuller version of herself. The quiet girl was still there, but so was the confident one. They existed together, balanced and strong. As she left the room, the sound of the piano still echoed in her mind. She knew this performance would stay with her for a long time. It was not just about music. It was about being seen, about trusting oneself, about sharing something real. Outside, the world felt the same, but she felt different walking through it. Lighter, taller, ready. She understood now that being underestimated did not limit her, prepared her. The moment would be remembered by those who witnessed it. Not because it was loud or flashy, but because it was honest. A quiet girl touched a piano, and instead of fading into the background, she showed everyone who she truly was.